Welcome to the latest version of View from the 8th, the Leeds take on the Allsop Prop Chat. Today we're focused on student housing. I am delighted to have Vicky, Bingham and Owen with me. Vicky, Owen, welcome.
Thanks, Jack.
Pleasure to be here, Jack.
Vicky, you're known as Bingers in the office and a lot of clients, so forgive me, I'll use your nickname going forward. How long have you been in Allsop now?
12 years.
And where did you start at Leeds?
So I started in the Leeds office, graduated from University of Leeds and joined in 2012, originally in the residential valuation team, then got the bug for agency, transferred over to the investment team. I then got the opportunity to go on a secondment in London, working for a client called Student Cribs. In the meantime, Allsop set up a dedicated student team, so it felt natural to come back to Leeds and join the student team.
Great stuff. Owen, same question. When did you start Allsop?
I've been here about 8 years. I started off in the graduate scheme and did the auctions and the valuations.
Down in London? Down
in London, yeah. Business rates have always been based down in London, and then moved into the sort of resi transactional team. And from there, I went on secondment to a propco and focused on then BTR and forward funding. More recently, moved across then to student and focusing on the operational and the funding and development side of that.
It's great. It shows the sort of breadth of teams we have at Allsop that you've been able to grow that experience up until now. Geographically, Owen London, Vicky Leeds, where's the line drawn, or are you sort of in your team, is it all merged?
Yeah, I would say that there isn't really a line to be drawn. We're involved across the whole country, really, aren't we, Owen?
Yeah, at the moment I'm doing something in Zone 1 London and 600 beds in Sunderland, so pretty spread.
A lot of time on the roads. So yeah, going back to those sort of other teams we have, there must be a fair bit of crossover with the type of buildings and properties you deal with, and how does that look in terms of how you work with the other teams, Vicky?
Yeah, we do lots of work with other teams within the business. We think it's the right thing to give our clients the best advice. So we're regularly speaking to our valuation team, discussing sales and what we're seeing in the marketplace. We also do a lot with our auction team. We can provide that private treaty auction backstop route. In fact, Owen recently sold a development in Southampton using that method. We also do a lot with our commercial teams. I actually sit next to a commercial agent, Rick Brook, so often discussing potential conversion opportunities, office to student, for example. And actually, several of their clients are diversifying into student accommodation as well. So, yeah, lots of crossover.
You've opened up a few things I'd like to get into there, but maybe that's another pod, if I can persuade you again. How's the market at the minute, Owen?
Yeah, it certainly feels like the student housing sector is in a really good place right now. There's obviously positive reports for the last quarter with regards to investment volumes, but from our perspective, we just are really busy in terms of the instructions that we're dealing with, and we're kind of have the expectation that we're going to have one of our best years financially.
Would you say that hasn't quite been the case over the last few years? There's certainly been a lot of difficult headlines.
I think the student housing sector as a whole is generally been positive for a number of years. I think it's just deals have taken a bit longer to get over the line and things like compliance, etc. But we are constantly having really positive conversations with new capital entering the market. But we're also now involved in a lot of varying different instructions. So from HMO portfolios to single asset PBSAs to office to PBSA conversions. There's a real good breadth of instructions that we're involved in, and I think that's key. And then we're now starting to do a lot more of the forward funding and forward commits and the larger portfolios. So we've got a good mixture of instructions and involvements across the sector.
So you're obviously very, very busy. What makes student housing, or certainly the student housing market, so popular with investors?
Big question. Big old question, Jack. Yeah, thanks for that. I guess I'll fire off some main points. Of course, the maturity and performance of the UK market specifically, but the performance over the last few years has been good, and it's really proven. A big thing for international investors, but also UK investors, is the recognition of our UK universities. Another thing I'd suppose, is you get to rebase your rents every year, which is different to other commercial assets. And probably, whether this is actually the case, but it's considered less economically sensitive. So what I mean by that is sometimes people will refer to it as recession proof, on the basis that in times when there are maybe less jobs, people will look to university to attend. So, you've got some really good demand factors there. But really, it all comes down to supply demand. And so to put that into perspective, about last year, UCAS issued a report which said by 2030, the expectation is there'll be 1 million applicants for university. Now, that in 2005, that was about 500,000 applicants.
Oh, wow.
Now it's about 750,000. And so that million figure is a big growth in student numbers. And that is combined with a chronic undersupply of student accommodation is what makes the sector so exciting. Now, that growth has been driven a lot through international students over the last few years. But what we're going to see until 2030 is a huge boom in the domestic population. And the expectation, I think the Office of National Statistics says that there'll be about 900,000 18-year-olds in the population by 2030. Wow. So there's this huge growth expected, and fundamentally that's what drives the rental growth and the performance of the sector.
I think as well with the student housing sector, certainly for investors, it can be quite relatable, because I suspect a lot of investors probably did go to uni, and certainly, I did, and I would sort of go to halls of residence in year one and would follow into sort of HMOs or housing. Is that still the case at Bingham?
So students are still guaranteed their accommodation their first year, living in university halls of residence. But after that, the offering has changed and is much more available. So HMOs, as you lived in, Jack, are still very popular, particularly with the domestic students. And actually, HMOs make up the majority of the privately owned accommodation available. But the market is changing, and most university towns and cities now have an Article 4 direction, which restricts the change of use of C3 residential properties into C4 HMO properties without planning consent. And as we all know, local authorities are keen to keep this sort of traditional housing for professionals and families, which means there's a limit of the HMO bed spaces in the market. And as a result of that, there's been a larger growth in the privately owned student accommodation. So there's actually around 715,000 PBSA beds now, and that's supposed to be increasing to 825,000 by 2026. So there's been a real change in the focus of student accommodation. It's not just seen now as a place to sleep, hang out with your friends around a dirty kitchen, although no doubt, Jack, yours is a very clean kitchen. But there's a real emphasis on amenity space, services, coffee shops, state-of-the-art study rooms, games rooms, rooftop terraces. It's more of a hotel offering, much better than anything that we ever lived in, Jack.
It is interesting, the amenity piece, and it's a bit of a side point to what questions and things we were going to touch on today. What are the sort of strangest or sort of most out there or newest ideas that they're getting offered now, these students in PBSA? Because I remember even back when I went to university, you did start seeing the gyms come in and things like this. But I guess if you can get gym membership now for £10 down the road at Pure Gym, then do you need it in your accommodation anymore? I don't know. But as you said, what kind of things are they getting offered now?
There's a grand piano in a few that I've seen.
I think it's things like karaoke rooms and stuff, a bit out there, but it's all delivered for the tenant demographic. So
sure.
But there are some pretty out there ones.
So this sort of leads us on quite nicely. PBSA is quite expensive. Is this because they're paying for karaoke rooms?
I think the most premium accommodation, there is an array of amenity, and there's a lot of research that indicates that students are prepared to pay for that. And that is typically from the international market, and there's nothing wrong with that kind of PBSA, and more is needed. However, the challenge from our perspective is seeing that growth in demographics that we said from the domestic market, And we see a real challenge looming in the fact that there will be a large proportion of the student population that won't be able to access that type of product. So the cost of attending uni is quite multifaceted, but the real main expense is obviously housing. Over the past 2 years, the maintenance loan has been increased by 5.2%. But what you've seen across, this is a generalization across the sector, but 15% rental growth in that period. So students have ultimately got less money in their back pocket from a loan that's supposed to support them.
So sorry to jump in, just remind us, so you get your student loan for fees.
Correct, yeah.
And let's just park that, let's say it's covered, and then you get your maintenance loan if you need it, and that's sort of means tested. But the average, do you know what the average is? I think it was about 7,500, was it, in the UK?
It depends how you look at it, and it's tiered depending upon household income, but I think it's around £8,000. Now that breaks back to about £154 per week. And from the research we've done across HMOs and PBSA, the average blend is about 147. So
Of rent?
Oh, wow. So therefore, you're looking at £5 or £6 in those examples. And remember, the HMO is probably a more affordable product as well.
Sure, we're talking averages. Yeah.
So ultimately, we're getting into a position, and again, the driving demand that's going to come forward, that we're going to be in positions, unless something's seriously changed with that maintenance loan, which there's no indication that there will be at the moment, is that students are going to be really strapped for cash, or certainly a large proportion of them. And so there's increasing reliance on the bank of mum and dad, even more than there was a few years ago.
At a time where that bank might not be as rich as it once was.
Yeah, exactly. And there's far more focus on students to have part-time jobs. And that's fine for courses that maybe allow that. But if you've got a really intensive course, then you potentially can't get a part-time job. And you're therefore then, maybe we're limiting certain demographics from attending certain courses or certain universities. And so that's maybe a challenge with as a sector that we're going to face.
Yeah, and just adding to that, as I said, that HMOs can offer that affordable option. The average HMO is sitting around £122 per person per week. And because that sector is limited, the rental growth in that sector is also increasing. So actually, Stu Rents reported there was a 13% rental increase in the HMO market alone. So again, rents are increasing there as well. So,
Owen, you've mentioned a chronic lack of or small amount of supply, or certainly an issue going into the future, and demand is significantly increasing. Why don't developers just keep building more PBSA?
Yeah, I wish it was that simple, and kind of constantly go to conferences where that's often proposed as the solution. I think we will see some partnerships with universities and developers that will deliver a proportion of that accommodation, but nowhere near enough. And it's well reported that universities are pretty cash strapped at the moment. So again, we're not going to see a huge delivery from them ultimately. The reality of the fact is that delivering affordable PBSA is very challenging, and that's because, lots of investors probably would like to do, but if you're doing ground up development, I think as a rule of thumb, the expectation is that you need to be charging at a minimum £200 per week. And that is because you've got various costs associated with ground up development. So that's land cost, planning difficulties, and the timescale that would take. But probably what's hit it most hardest over the last few years is build cost inflation. So although a number of beds will be delivered, the question is how much is actually going to be attainable from the proportion of the population that we're talking about in this podcast.
Yeah, if every developer's reaching for best in class, because maybe they're forced to do so, as you say, from ground up. And why not? If they're dealing with institutional money or other, they want to be the best. They want to provide the best. They want to get the highest rents, because that is going to make it profitable.
Yeah, and it's by no means is that not actually, that will help the overall supply as well. So it is a positive, and there is a market for that, and it's definitely needed. However, pretty much all the focus has been on brand new development. And the question has to be, especially going forward, if we're not going to get more support, is what's the accommodation that's going to fill that gap for maybe the domestic market?
Well, yeah. So that's interesting. I mean, look, let's jump back to some numbers you were saying before. If the new PBSA has to charge at least £200 a week, but your maintenance loan is covering, what did you say, 140, 150?
Circa 150.
Yeah. You just can't. You simply cannot afford that.
Yeah, and there is a kind of an expectation that there is a reliance on the bank of mum and dad,
or that job,
anyway, or if it's international, it's from elsewhere. But it's certainly a problem. It's certainly as people get a bit more squeezed elsewhere as well.
Have you got a feel for international numbers? I mean, where are they going at the minute?
There is anticipation that they will continue to grow, but as I say, the domestic growth will be the main driver towards that million applicants.
Okay, so if we're not building more PBSA to cover that, we'll build more HMOs.
Well, that would be great, wouldn't it? But no, that Article 4 is stopping that increase in HMO numbers. But I mean, an easy solution would be if we could get more support from the government in terms of extra funding to help those universities invest in their own accommodation. And it's helpful that Labour's recognising the importance that universities provide in the community, in the economy. It's kind of too early to say what incentives Labour might offer. And as Owen touched on earlier, we do think we're going to see maybe more partnerships between the public and the private sector. But we don't think that that's going to be enough to solve the issue alone. There's going to be a growing role for this private sector to provide more beds.
So if your HMOs are at, let's say, the lower scale in terms of the price, and the PBSA at the top end, you said 120, I think, for HMO rent, and at least 200 for your PBSA. You've got quite a gap in the middle there. Is there an obvious solution?
Yeah, I think it's probably what we're kind of leading on to, was that, in our opinion, there is a bit of a compelling case and a bit slightly untapped market in investors looking at what is kind of branded as first generation PBSA.
Is that the kind of thing that I might have been in 10 years ago?
Yeah, essentially it's stuff that was built 20, 30 years ago, or maybe even longer. That is quite basic, but is normally located in almost on campus, and was once upon a time, great student digs.
Yeah.
Now, these types of assets have probably ended their life cycle, and they need someone to come in and look to repurpose them and retrofit them and do various things in order to extend their life cycle. But the key is that these properties will become compliant, provide higher quality accommodation than traditional student digs that they replace, but provide discounted rents in comparison to the new build PBSA that will be on the market.
So these are properties that have probably reached the end of their sort of natural life cycle. Don't have gyms or karaoke rooms, I suppose.
Yeah, so I suppose there's different strategies when refurbishing these first generation assets. So we know of companies that are carrying out more of a light touch refurbishment and are able to offer some of the most affordable accommodation in the market. There's also options to do more extensive modernisation works, but still keeping those costs lower. Quite unique ways of doing this is by adding amenity spaces using outdoor pods in car parks or in gardens, reconfiguring the existing layout to add en suites. There's also an argument to say that actually students don't always need to have en suites. There's also only having one amenity space, but making sure that's multifunctional rather than having your multiple rooms, which is obviously expensive to build. So yeah, there's lots of different ways, but it's also important to also hit those ESG credentials that everyone talks about. So you can also decarbonise the property by using solar panels, electric heating, air source heat pumps, that kind of thing.
Look, this solution sounds sensible. You've sort of touched on what is involved. Why isn't everyone doing it?
Well, I suppose there is some reluctance from some investors, but arguably the price point where these assets are positioned, you're targeting the largest demographic in the sector, that being the domestic population, and you aren't necessarily relying so much on the higher paying international students, which is taking up a thinner proportion of the market. You're kind of spreading your risk there.
Which, as we said before, it seems to be there's a fair gap starting
between the two,
yeah. And just on that, and we're talking about institutional money, and maybe we're not willing to say it, but they're mostly driven by profit, surely? Yes, ESG credentials and other bits and pieces, but they've got to make money. Do they look at HMOs, or is it, are they mostly focused on PBSA?
Well, I think because the HMO space is restricted somewhat, investors are potentially looking at these first generation buildings and creating cluster accommodation, which sort of mirrors the HMO market more.
Gives scale.
Yeah.
Whereas the HMO, the dirty kitchens and everything else, they can't get their heads around 8 beds in here and 7 beds on the next road over.
Exactly. There's generally less scale within the HMO market because you cannot create new bedrooms as much.
Good stuff. And I haven't made the point, but this is part 1 of this podcast, and we're excited to have one of your clients on the next part of this, who happens to have bought a building off you recently.
Right.
And is working on the solution you've proposed today.
Yeah, make sure you ask him lots of tough questions.
Yeah, I will do. Guys, a bit of a different one here. Always like to sort of put a bit of a curveball at the end to get your genuine opinion on something. Student housing, there's different ways to pose this, but where's the opportunity? And I mean, I want you to both commit to a city or two. Where would you be focusing investment yourself over the next 6 to 12 months? Vicky?
Well, I'm a big fan of York because I think it's got strong fundamentals and the
That
underlying
feels like an
value.
easy answer.
Underlying value is there in sort of the residential market as well. But actually, in terms of opportunity, I think Sheffield has had a lot of bad press recently. And because of that, the council have actually really focused on understanding the issues there. They've actually commissioned a report to look into it further. And HEPI have actually classed Sheffield as one of the most affordable cities going forward. So if we're here talking today about the issues around affordability, then Sheffield should actually be quite a key city for students to go to.
Owen?
Yeah, I think similar probably on the theme of affordability, but I'd be kind of targeting maybe to purchase operational type stock that is performing way below that £200 a week that I referenced. And so fundamentally, you're very confident that there's, if that's the base of the market, then there's very little supply going to come forward. And so, somewhere like Huddersfield or maybe the second tier sort of places will actually be quite good investment cases. But of course, investing in Bristol or Exeter or whatever, it's still quite a good shout too.
Sure. Guys, thank you. That was really interesting. It's a good introduction to a part of the sector and a challenge and a solution that we're going to hopefully address in more detail with the clients of yours that you've introduced in part 2. Where can we reach you?
My email address is Vicky, vicky.bingham@allsop.co.uk.
Owen?
Yep, mine is Owen, Owen.Rees, REES @allsop.co.uk. Jack, thank you for having us. Loved it.
No worries. Thanks, guys.